Hey, Dirt Bike TV here. We're here with Joe Carl, our buddy up here in Utah, and because we're in Utah, we're away from our suspension support people. So Joe is suspension support. We have the forks off of our RX 250 2020, and fork seals are blown. This happens kind of overuse. If you don't wash your bike very good, or if you go through some super muddy stuff, it's very easy for these fork seals to go out. It happens. A lot of times dudes can save them by cleaning up in there. Half the time though, it really can't be solved unless you get new fork seals. Luckily, we have new fork seals, and we have Joe who's going to help us go through. First thing you're going to want to do is write down what your clickers are at, and before you start messing with any of these, write down what your clickers are at so you know what they're going to be at. And then Joe also told me that if you have the tools to do this, you're going to want to get the top bits of your forks loose and the bottom bit right.
Yeah, so essentially while it's still in the bike, this cap is usually tough to get off once it's out of the bike. So what you'll do is you loosen your upper clamp so it's not clamping down on the threads, and then just break this loose. That way it's easier to get apart once you're off the bench.
So those two things that you're going to want to do before you get it off the bike or start taking it apart. So we're going to go through here and go through some of the steps of taking it apart, and we'll give you some pointers. So Joe is super strong here, but you can have a buddy hold it while you have your tool on top there, and then you hit it with a soft mallet, and then cap will slide off like so.
So we're going to put it in our drain pan right behind us here. Let's see what our fluid looks like. Pretty bad.
Pretty bad. It is stock Honda fork fluid that has had a leaky seal. So
we'll let that drain for a minute, and then we'll show you how to remove the inner cartridge. Okay, so from here, once your fluid's drained out, you're going to put your cap back on. You just need to snug it up. And then you move to the bottom of your fork. This is going to be your inner cartridge here. So we'll throw a wrench on that, break that loose, and then we'll move to the next step.
all right, so we just broke inner seal?
The inner cartridge.
Inner cartridge.
So this is the nut for the inner cartridge. Let's back that off.
Yep.
And then we go back to the fork cap and it should move from there.
Cool.
Okay, so once you get your cap loose, Rocky Mountain sells a tool that specifically goes right here and just kind of holds that in place. That's all we're trying to do is separate this so we can loosen these two nuts. Pretty basic. Throw a wrench on here, break your nut loose. Once that nut is off, just back it off.
And so this is why you want to have your clickers checked
Before you
take it apart. Because when you're taking apart all this stuff, your clickers are not going to be the same.
Okay, pull your tool out. There's going to be some oil that may still come out of here. Dampening rod. And then you just remove your cap, and that inner cartridge will come out. Now you separated your inner cartridge from your outer cartridge. We'll let this drain for a minute. And then I'll show you how to break this inner cartridge down. Alright, so once you pull out your inner chamber, you're going to remove your dampening rod. Spring's going to come out. You got your cap. Just kind of lay out your parts. That way it's easier for you to get it all put back together. Once you get to this point, you got to separate your inner and your outer tube. You have a dust seal here and then a retaining clip below it. So what we'll typically do is just get a small screwdriver and kind of break this seal here. Work your way around. and just back that dust seal off. Slide your dust seal down. It's kind of hard to tell, but you can see there's a retaining clip right here. Pretty basic to get out. You can usually hook a screwdriver right here and just kind of work it out. Once you slide your retaining clip down, you're going to have your seal behind it. Best way to do it is kind of a slide hammer motion. Separate the two cartridges, give it a couple tugs, and they'll separate. It's a good idea to obviously pay attention to your order here. You have your dust seal, retaining clip. This is going to be your main seal here, the washer, inner and outer bushings. So what I like to do is just lay out a rag and take them off in the order that they're in. That way nothing gets out of order. Okay, so for removing these caps, pretty simple. You're just going to hold the outer cap with your fork cap tool and then just come in with a wrench. And these aren't very tight. And you're just going to separate them. Once you break it loose, there is oil in this inner cartridge, so once you get it loose, just walk over to your oil pan and drain out any residual oil that's left in the cartridge. That's a pretty basic deal. So once you get your cap loose, it can be under a little bit of tension here. There is oil in this cartridge, so typically what you'll do is just tip it over, give a little bit of a push on the rod, and it's going to push it out. And then you'll have your inner cartridge and your oil here. As you can see, it does make a bit of a mess. And then you'll want to pump your cartridge a few times. You see how your oil coming out. Make sure you get all the oil out of this inner cartridge. And we'll let that drain for a few minutes, and then we'll clean everything up and put it back together. Okay, once you get everything torn down, it's a good idea to look at everything, inspect everything, make sure your bushings are all in good shape, your O-rings are all in good shape. These are your inner and your outer bushings. They have a Teflon coating around the outside of the bushings. It's a good idea to inspect them, make sure there's no nicks or no areas where the coating has worn through. You'd be able to see it pretty easily because you'd be able to see the brass through the coating. On this one, it would be just opposite. It would be on the inside edge of this bushing. So it's a good idea just to look at everything, make sure that the coatings are still in good shape. If you do have any areas where it's worn through, what you're going to want to do is order a bushing kit. All Balls sells a bushing kit that you can replace all these bushings with. Today we're going to be using All Balls seals. So it comes with the dust seal and the fork seal for both forks. Our bushings are in good shape, so we're just going to be replacing the seals today. So we just want to get everything cleaned up with some contact cleaner, wipe everything down, and then the reassemble. The only thing I do want to note real quick on this inner cartridge, they don't recommend using any contact cleaner for this inner cartridge for the inner components. So you're going to just take a clean rag and make sure you wipe it down, get anything off of that. Okay, so one area a lot of people miss when doing their fork seals is inspecting the fork tube. A lot of times you'll get nicks, and even the smallest nick in your fork tube can ruin a fork seal. So you replace your fork seals, and then if you don't check for any nicks in here, it could just ruin your new fork seals. Our fork tube is in pretty good shape, no nicks. If you did have somewhere that had a small nick or an abrasion, typically what you'll do is take a Scotch-Brite pad and kind of just polish up that area, make sure it's smooth. A lot of times if you run your fingernail over, you shouldn't have it catch on anything. So we'll go ahead and get this cleaned up, and then we'll reassemble.
So putting it back together, we've cleaned it all, and we have our new parts that we're replacing. What's the first thing we put back in?
Okay, so first thing you want to do is start with your dust seal. Usually what we'll do is take some oil, and we'll put a little bit of oil on the tube itself. So we'll put some oil just in the lid here. just take some of the oil and make sure you put it on the tube, because this is where your seals are going to be riding on. So you're going to start with your dust seal. It's going to go in this orientation. Again, when you took it apart, if you're paying attention to the order everything went in, it's fairly simple to put back on. What we'll use is some sort of protection to go over this edge. This is a really sharp edge right here, so it can tear your new seals. Motion Pro makes a silver bullet, or this guy right here. For this fork, a slightly bigger fork, so you have a different size here. These come in multiple sizes for different forks. Pretty simple deal. You slide it right over the fork. It'll slide down just over that sharp edge. And you're going to take your dust seal, make sure you have it oriented in the right direction. Take a little bit of oil, put it on the inner edge of the dust seal, and you're just going to slide it down. Pretty basic. And you just go in order. Retaining clip goes next. Then we have our seal here. There are times if people aren't paying attention, they'll put this seal in backwards. The easiest way to remember it is if the opening here where your retaining spring is always going to go up the oil side. So that goes on next. Slide it down. Your spacer. Well, we can pull our bullet off now.
If we don't have too much oil on our hands.
Yeah, let's get that a little slippery. So next is going to be your spacer. You have inner and outer bushings. So outer bushing, inner bushing, and this you just want to make sure it seats nicely into that groove. And that's going to be your order that we took everything off in. From there, pretty simple. We'll come back to our tube. Gonna slide everything into the tube. Slide your bushing in, a washer, and then you're gonna take a seal driver. Again, Tuss makes a really nice seal driver. There's a couple other companies that make them. It's just gonna make this part of the job a lot easier if you have a seal driver. What I like to do is kind of just stand the fork up. That way these can settle. Come in with your seal driver. There's not a lot of pressure in this section here. All you're really trying to do is get your washers and your bushings, everything to line up. Once you get those kind of driven in, your O-ring or your seal is going to go next. I like to just start it with my fingers. And then take your driver and just kind of work it in. With our driver, this is a 48mm driver. So what we're gonna have to do, because these are the bigger forks, you just need to grab a bigger driver, and then you come in, work your driver in, and just work that seal in until it seats. Once you drive it in all the way, you'll hear it seat, and then you just put your retaining clip in. And so we'll skip to that part where we're putting our retaining clip in. Okay, so one of the issues we're running into right now is just our driver's not the right size. These are slightly bigger forks. They're going to be 49 to 50mm forks. So what we'll do, kind of an old school trick, is we'll pull our retaining clip back off. What we'll do is we'll take our old seal, we're going to cut it in half essentially, and then snap it around right here, and we'll use the seal itself to kind of press in the new seal. So we'll go ahead and do that, cut this in half, and then we'll show you how we do that. Okay, so like I said, what we're gonna do, we just nipped out a section of our old dust seal. We're gonna use that to kind of help press in the new dust seal.
New fork seal.
New fork seal, yeah, sorry.
And old fork seal.
So what you'll do is kind of just work it in, if you can, with your fingers. And kind of just work your way around. If you need to, you can put a little bit of pressure to kind of help seat that in. Essentially what we're doing is just using the old seal to kind of press in the new one. Okay, once you get your seal driven in all the way, you're going to snap your retaining clip in. Good idea just to make sure it's nice and snug into the groove. That's what's going to hold all of your components into the fork. Next part is just going to be your dust seal. Slide it down. Most of the time you can just work this in with your hands. If you can't, again, you can go back to your driver and then just help drive it in. Another option as well, you can just kind of put a little bit of pressure on it. Okay, that is assembled.
So now all that's left is putting in the inner cartridge. That's the inner. What is that? The inner cartridge, right?
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll grab our ratio right and put in the specified amount. Again, just refer to your service manual. This particular inner cartridge takes 197 milliliters of fluid, so we'll grab that, get that topped off, and put this back together.
Awesome.
Okay. So what you'll do, take your cartridge, 197 cc's in this one. So before we do that, typically what you'll want to do is bleed it a little bit. Just small motions back and forth, kind of suck that fluid down into the tube. Do that 4 or 5 times. Once you can feel the action is pretty consistent. This sometimes can be a little tough because there is fluid in the chamber, so it's going to have some resistance to it. So you just want to snug this up. It doesn't need to be that tight. Right now it's kind of just the gasket. Okay, so once you get it snugged up, you're going to want to check your action. Typically what you'll do, these holes right here will bleed out any extra fluid that is in the tube. We measured it out, so it should be pretty close. But you'll want to just check your action all the way up, and it should return on its own. As long as you have a smooth action, you want to make sure it returns all the way out. So you have a full action there. Any additional fluid, if you did overfill it, would come out of these weep holes right here. So we have a good inner cartridge right now. Everything's working properly. Okay, so now it's time to reassemble the inner chamber. So what we'll do first, put our spring in. We're going to take our inner chamber. Work our tube up, lightly thread the cap for now. This just needs to be hand tight. We're going to take this back off in just a sec. Flip it over. We're back to the same process we did for disassembly. So you're going to need a wrench or a special tool, whichever one you have, in order to hold this in place. So we'll take our 14 millimeter. You're going to hold it in place right here. And you're going to reassemble. Make sure you don't forget your
Dampening rod?
Dampening rod. Your dampening rod and this both have a flat edge. You just need to make sure you line those up when you're putting it back together.
It'll slide in nice, right?
Yeah, you'll feel it lock in place. So we'll just walk it all the way down. The only other thing to note is this collar right here. We didn't talk about it before we put it together, but this collar needs to be backed out all the way. That way this can seat completely, otherwise it'll mess with your adjustments. So once you get it all the way down, it's all the way seated right now. You can see there's a gap right here. That's what it should look like at this point. What you're going to do now is just throw a wrench on here, and then your 21 millimeter. So it's going to be 17 on the inner, 21 millimeter on this outer nut. You're just going to snug those up. It's always nice if you get a buddy to help hold things in place so it doesn't spin on you. Doesn't have to be super tight, just nice and snug. Come back up, pull down on your fork tube, release your tool, and then you can drive this home. Okay, so again, reference your manual for any amounts. This particular fork, standard settings call for 372 cc's. So again, we're just going to back our cap off, slide the tube down, give us a little bit of room. Using your ratio ride or whatever measurement device you have, you're just going to pour your fluid in right here. Pretty simple. Tube comes back up. Tighten it up. Last thing you need to do, reset your clickers back where they were. I'll typically wait till I get it back on the bike to snug up the fork cap. Just makes it a little bit easier. Again, you just want to have the bottom clamp tight when you have it on the bike. Snug up your cap and you're good to go.
All right, so that is a look at changing the fork seals and dust seals on some CRF suspension on these CRFs has been around for a very long time. There was some air fork gears in there, but that doesn't really matter. Most guys are going to be dealing with this Tech fork. 2020, maybe 2019 has a bigger diameter, so watch out for that. Make sure you can measure with some calipers or look at your owner's manual. But yeah, that's a look at it. We'll show you a high speed right now of the other one coming apart. Basically, left and right side both the same. But yeah, thanks for Joe for helping us out, and see you on the track trail soon.